All right, everybody. We're in Miami. I'm joined by a British invader.
Hello.
He's chewing on a sandwich right now,
Mm-hmm.
which I advised him he was able to do if he didn't make too many disgusting noises, which is probably inevitable. There's also going to be ambient noise, I would expect. So we're in a coffee shop in downtown Miami, but they were nice enough to turn off the music, which I hate anyway because ambient music infests our lives. You can't go anywhere in public without annoying music being piped at you
Sure.
constantly.
Sure.
Have you noticed that?
I can see it. Certainly elevators. I mean, the place I'm staying at the moment is it's not even elevator music. It's like lobby foyer music, and it's just low key club bangers. So that's always interesting.
Well, my problem is that you can't go to a coffee shop or you can't go even to any kind of eatery,
Mm-hmm.
without music piped at you. And usually it's too loud. I know I sound like an old man, but
You do sound like an old man.
well, that's fine. All right, so you were in the spin room or whatever last night.
I was.
I was in the actual debate venue on Wednesday.
Yeah.
But yesterday I got exiled to the Yang Gang gathering in Miami Beach, so that was where I experienced the debate.
Right.
What was your top observation from being in the spin room yesterday?
Well, both nights, one of the first things I noticed was that the immediate swarm was bigger for whoever Biden's spokesperson is, bigger than a lot of the actual candidates. So yesterday, Simone Sanders was in there, and she was, the crowd around her was about 5 people deep immediately, and obviously that makes sense because obviously
Simone Sanders is one of the PR people for Biden now.
Yeah.
She actually worked for Bernie in 2016, and I spoke to her in a spin room in 2016.
Yeah.
When she was doing it on behalf of Bernie, and now she just transitioned to Biden as if that's not a sort of inexplicable shift. Although it's explicable, but in relation to just her sheer careerism.
Right. I think, that's a fairly unenviable task last night, because obviously there was a bit of a get Biden motive, and that's one of the most obvious ways if you're on single digits in the polls to get noticed, which a lot of people tried. Obviously, Kamala Harris was slightly more successful, at least in the perception, than Eric Swalwell was in terms of his approach as to going after the former vice president. But yeah, I read afterwards that people in his campaign are worried about how badly it went for him. They say, but then I'm not sure that that's going to have any difference where it actually matters, which is
the people
within 5 states.
It's because whoever is being quoted there or referenced, they're just people who are scrolling on Twitter and reacting to what the emergent consensus is. So it's not as if they're actually looking at any kind of real world effect and saying, "Oh my God, that's so horrible for Biden." I watched it, and and I wrote this in the piece today.
Yeah.
Well, okay, Kamala is obviously a competent individual who is a lawyer and is the Attorney General of California, and is therefore obviously somewhat suited to being able to hold her own in a debate setting.
Sure.
But I didn't think it was that staggeringly good, frankly. I mean, and I actually thought that one of Biden's retorts was pretty good to her, which didn't get a lot of attention, which is that he said,
He was a public defender.
I was a public defender,
Yeah.
whereas you, Kamala, decided to, ride through the prosecutorial ranks, which is actually a legitimate point.
I think that might have been his delivery, though, because that is, as a point to make, a really good one. And, it's the biggest sticking point with Kamala Harris is that she has this, very, strict record as a prosecutor, and when she was Attorney General in California. And I basically was split the field yesterday of those 10 candidates into, they effectively had 2 approaches. 5 of them were remarkably chilled out, and 5 of them were very mad. And on the chilled side, you had the people who didn't get to speak that much, but then they didn't try to jump in. I think they learned from John Delaney, not John Mulaney, the comedian. That would have been way more entertaining. But no, John Delaney, the Maryland businessman. They learned from the trying to jump in.
John Delaney was kind of comical just for how utterly irritating he was.
Yeah, well, there's a risk that it makes you look like a bit pathetic, which, if you're already on 1% and have scraped into the debate on only one of the two criteria, then there's a high risk of that anyway. But the people, of the, people who are polling well, Buttigieg was very relaxed and Biden was very relaxed, but then the other people who didn't really jump in were Hickenlooper, Williamson, and Yang. Yang, who got less speaking time than anyone else, claims that his mic was cut, but he still spoke. I mean, I saw an interesting graphic today, which was contrasting where people were polling immediately before the debate to how much speaking time they actually got, and he was polling, I think, about like the higher end of the 1%, whereas there are other candidates on the debate stage who are below 1% and towards 0, but he still only got, I think, 2 minutes 58.
Yeah, he got the least of any candidate over the both nights.
Yeah. But so
I was at the Yang gathering.
Yeah.
And you could finish your point, but
no. But my point was basically, there are two approaches that you could have taken, and Harris. Basically, Biden was one of the more chilled out guys, and I don't think was as prepared to go on the defensive, and he didn't. I'm not going to say that there was a issue with his preparation, but I think other candidates would have been prepared in the way where they're like, okay, well, if someone's going to come after you, they're going to say this, and this is what you should say back to it. I'm not sure how well thought out his response was there.
His response to Swalwell, I think, was actually surprisingly adroit, where it was like, I'll take the torch or something, or I'm still holding the torch. I forget exactly what he said, but it was actually mildly clever. It reminded me of like old Biden, who actually excelled in debates in the past. My overriding question for his candidacy has always been, is he going to be up to snuff cognitively at 76?
Yeah.
Which I always thought was going to be a much bigger liability for him than any old vote that somebody unearths from 1974 or something.
So you're more concerned by his senior moment when he was asked what the first thing he'd do. Wasn't it the question was what's the first thing you'd do if you were what was your first act be, or the most important thing you'd address, the most important problem you'd address in your first day as president? And he said defeating Donald Trump, which fait accompli, you would have done that by then.
Yeah, I mean,
senioritis, really.
I mean, I don't know if that was senioritis. I actually think it was a somewhat clever way to answer the question for him. He's like, well, don't worry about what I do on day one. The first priority, even before that, is to beat Trump. I mean, he's saying he's the best suited to beat Trump. So it was actually just kind of a flip of the question.
Yeah.
For a framing that's more,
do you think
favorable to him.
Do you think? I mean, obviously, it's the first debate of 12. Do you think that anyone? I think the thing which Trump did fairly successfully, as well as in the Republican debates in 2015 and 16, he roughhoused everyone, monstered a few of the other candidates, but then in his fairly dour and dystopian message, he was quite clear that he had at least a vision or a perspective of the company. Did you see anything which hints which candidate might be developing something which could be like a Hope 08 type message, or like unifying message or platform going forward in this election?
No.
Nah, nor did I.
I mean, but that's not what they're really going for now. They're making arguments that are specifically tailored to the first 4 states in the Democratic primary cycle. So, and there are so many candidates that they almost have to cultivate factional support in a way, and therefore they have to deliver red meat to particular demographics within the party coalition, which is kind of in conflict with having a kind of holistic, unifying message or whatever. So, I mean, but then again...
Well, the issue is, so in another piece which we published this morning on Spectator USA, Charles Lipson was basically talking about the Democratic Catch-22, which is that you have to be a certain way in a primaries. You've got to be a certain way to win the primaries at the moment in terms of where you stand on certain issues, but then that way will often be something which would mean you couldn't do that well in the general.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's always the dynamic. I mean, the cliche is you have to, like, run left in the primary and run to the center in the general election, and it's the inverse for Republicans.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't...
And there are signs that point to that, as in, like, John Hickenlooper saying about the need to distance yourself from socialism is not going to play well in this primary with this, with that room,
I don't know.
Right?
I mean, I actually spoke to, I was in South Carolina last weekend.
Yeah.
And I was at the Jim Clyburn Fish Fry and just various other places talking to voters. And I actually did hear from a couple of them who, because I did the piece for the Spectator on like Bernie and Biden and can they get the black vote and that kind of thing. So I spoke to a lot of black voters, and I would synthesize the common sentiment as, Bernie's okay, I don't dislike him, but socialism, really? I mean, isn't that kind of a dicey proposition?
And this was immediately after, like the week before, he'd kind of owned up and said, I am a democratic socialist and this is what I believe.
Yeah, I mean, he gave
he
gave a full address defending his label, his self-described label as a socialist, which, I mean, we should acknowledge is kind of a landmark in American politics. I mean, that would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, and even in the context of a Democratic primary. But one thing that occurred to me today is I don't really recall Hillary in 2016 ever criticizing Bernie for the fact that he had adopted this label of socialist. They went at each other here and there, but it was mostly kind of on discrete policy issues rather than the whole ideological labeling thing. Now, Hillary did have surrogates who criticized Bernie for being a socialist, notably Claire McCaskill, the now ousted senator from Missouri.
Yeah.
So it was raised, but I don't remember the candidate herself ever bringing it up. So I wonder now if Bernie, because there are so many candidates, including some who are going after him directly for being a socialist, most notably Hickenlooper, but I think others maybe a little more indirectly. Yeah. I wonder if the actual socialism label now is more of a potential liability for him than it might have been in 2016, because people don't realize this, but Bernie actually garnered support from across the spectrum in 2016. It wasn't just the hard ideological socialist left. He got moderates. He got rural voters who aren't, steadfast, dyed-in-the-wool socialists, obviously. And I wonder now if some of that support may be slipping because both of the size of the field and because his self-identification as socialist is a little more visible.
It could be. I think the size of the field is the interesting one, as in there are so many other candidates to pick from that if you were because there were 5 choices in the Democratic primary in 2016, of which Bernie was the most avowedly left wing of them. You had
Webb, really 2 choices.
You had Webb, who was interesting in his own respect. You had O'Malley, who wasn't at all, and then Bernie was so different that criticizing him for who he is and who he had been by that point, 35 years into his career, didn't seem to make sense. Whereas now, because the Democrats are out of power, you're in a position where you're having that wider ideological conversation within the party, and you're in this point where you're going to have a potentially a more leftist candidate, and the more leftist way to run for this, or there's a fairly establishment Democrat way to run for this. And a lot of people in this debate, in the lead up to this debate, were anticipating that it would be the coming together of those two ideas that you'd first see play out across the debate. A lot of people were expecting a bit more of a spat between Biden and Bernie in particular, because Biden's obviously the front runner of being a more establishment, traditional Democrat. Bernie is the person who's the envelope pusher for the left wing of the Democratic movement. But that didn't really happen until 10:45 p.m. last night when they started to talk about the Iraq War. And
even that was a little
decision that Joe Biden made, I think you said in your piece in 2002.
Yeah, right. And even that wasn't. It was kind of tepid. I mean, it was just Bernie sort of respectfully saying that, hey, one of my disagreements with Joe is that I helped lead the anti-war movement in 2002 and he voted for the war, which is a fact that could have been delivered a little more forcefully.
Yeah.
With the moral dimensions a little more heavily emphasized. And Bernie did bring that up in 2016 in relation to Hillary, who also voted for the 2002 resolution. I mean, it's kind of amazing, and I mentioned this in the piece, that 17 years later, we are still litigating, or at least the Democratic candidates are still litigating a vote from 2002.
Well, but that basically...
It's because they keep insisting on fielding candidates who voted for the resolution.
But it in some ways characterizes just the way that people in this primary are standing against Biden, as in they find something that they don't like that he has done over a very long career that he's had, which doesn't, the thing with Bernie is by and large his history checks out and makes sense according to 2016 leftist politics and what's fashionable, and even 2019 was. Whereas Biden is the type of Democrat where he has made these decisions which are now popular. He supported stuff like the Hyde Amendment and the Iraq War, and ultimately it doesn't seem like necessarily the best way to confront someone and say, okay, well, what do you think now? because ultimately that's all that matters. It's like, where have you come on this issue? And if you're always prepared to like go back through someone's record and find something which offends you, that might be a good way to get some interest on a story that you are writing from a website in New York. But it is not necessarily the best way to whittle down a field into a candidate who's going to win in the states that matter and hand you an electoral college victory.
The thing that aggravates me, maybe the aggravation is not the right way to put it, but the thing that continually occurs to me is that the Democratic candidates, and you saw this even last night, they don't bring up any aspect of Biden's record that actually relates to the reasons why he's in a front-running status right now, or where he's in top contention, because he was the vice president for 8 years under Barack Obama, who's still wildly popular. I don't know why I have to keep repeating that, but it seems like none of the candidates will bring it up, or they can't. It doesn't occur to them that they have to kind of pierce through that mythology.
Yeah.
I mean, Biden is not
to attack Obama.
Biden is not polling at like 32% or whatever because of some vote that he cast in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
It's because he was transformed into like a quasi pop culture icon over 8 years, and he was elected twice on the same ticket as Barack Obama. Mm. But these candidates, they're in a paradox, and I've written about this before for the Spectator as well, where like they can't directly criticize Obama because he could essentially be a kingmaker in the primary if he wanted to. So they have to isolate all the criticisms of Biden as separate from Obama's legacy, which is why they're delving into his decades-old history.
Right.
And I just don't know how effective that really is.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that, certainly.
I mean, is your average South Carolina primary voter really going to be persuaded that like Biden is overly solicitous to racists when he was elected with the first black president twice?
Right. No. But
doesn't that kind of insulate you from that criticism?
And that's the really telling thing I think about that moment and where it played out, because there are two places it played out which I think make it seem like it had greater significance than it did. The first is in the room itself, where the debate was taking place, which is a room filled with Planned Parenthood activists, Move On activists, everyone who's a kind of a Democrat who's basically been protesting effectively for the last 3 years.
Well, it's
and a lot of those people don't want Joe Biden to be president, and they would like a woman. They'd like a woman president.
I mean, the room's also filled with. I mean, the candidates themselves have a certain share of tickets that they hand out to their supporters, which is how everybody conceivably can get some applause because they have at least like 5 people in there who can like hoot and holler, But yeah, that's another dynamic that's sort of under-examined, which is that basically the Democratic professional class under age 50 is opposed to Biden winning the nomination.
Right.
In conjunction with the Democratic activist base and the journalists who are aligned in sensibility with the Democratic activists. Yeah. They're all against Biden, and yet he's leading in the polls, so you have a weird dynamic.
Where it's like, do you care more about that, or do you care more about beating Trump? Like, that's the trade-off.
Well, you have a dynamic where, like, the most of the opinion-making class is pretty fervently against Biden. Which, in my experience, leads to certain coverage blind spots. You saw this with Trump in 2016. Not that I'm making a strict analogy there, but when you have a near uniform antipathy toward a particular candidate in the media, it can be difficult to understand why that candidate does have appeal among demographics that are not going to be represented in that relatively elite section of the coalition.
Yeah.
That basically generates all the media narratives.
Well, to extend your point slightly, there is a parallel between Biden and Trump in the way that they deal with the press. In that there is a slight. I got a sense that from the Biden campaign at the moment, there is a slightly adversarial relationship with the press, because they are so eager to protect him and protect him from I think if you're one of those advisors, you're so worried about like
your microphone's like rubbing up against your neck a little bit, so maybe like reposition yourself. This is our comic relief.
Right here. Does that work?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe just like lean back a little bit in your seat.
Okay, perfect. I think those people are so concerned that gaffes have always undone Biden, and therefore everyone in the media they think is looking for gaps. And
Gaffes haven't always undone him. Again, he was elected twice with Barack Obama. I mean, he was elected as vice president.
Right, sure.
Do people not understand that? Can you read the Constitution, please?
Yeah.
You have to be elected vice president. It doesn't just magically materialize out of thin air. So no, he actually achieved.
But when
he reached the pinnacles of American power.
Yes. Okay. But there is still this color and perception that he is very gaffe prone, and then that's going to be his fatal downfall, right? And I think that the campaign are worried that people in the media, because as you correctly characterize it, a lot of people are looking for Biden to fail. They think they're so eager to protect him from that that's going to become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and therefore I think they're a bit more distant than the press than they otherwise would be. For example, Biden and Buttigieg were the two candidates who yesterday did not go into the spin room after the event, and like Biden, no one was surprised to not see Biden there because they're so used to just speaking to his surrogates instead of him. But eventually, well, I don't know that there necessarily has to be, a bit of a, glasnost like opening up where they decide to be slightly more open, or if they're just hoping to like covertly railroad him into the
I kind of wonder why Mayor Pete didn't go into the spin room. He seems a little depressed or something.
Well, obviously it makes sense given the shooting. He doesn't want to answer any questions about the shooting.
He was on Morning Joe this morning, and he seemed a little dour.
Well, I heard that I heard, though I didn't see it because I was in the spin room, but I heard that he was in the bar of the hotel whenever else was in the spin room. So he could have just been hungover.
Oh, come on. I don't believe that.
Which I would respect, by the way.
Does he even drink? He seems like too much of a goody two-shoes.
Yeah, he does drink. He was drinking a 40 on Desamero on Showtime in the Park in England, remember? So
he drank when it was like opportunistic for PR purposes.
Of course.
Yeah, I heard that Yang was actually sick yesterday.
Right.
So in the morning, he had a really bad cold or something and was actually on an IV.
Really?
So it was that bad. So that could have contributed to why he didn't interject as much as he might have, which, maybe it also has to do with the fact that his microphone was allegedly turned off. There is a video clip that's circulating that I saw where you can see him attempt to enunciate some kind of interjection and it doesn't get picked up.
Which could be real.
I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I was there. I witnessed firsthand the technical meltdown on night one, which is so bizarre. I mean, really? You're going to... What is this, like a college or radio station or something? Mm. I mean, it was weird because like you were sitting there and you heard like weird echoes and ambient noise all of a sudden come out of nowhere. It was like you're in some kind of like horror film or something. But so they had to like...
Which obviously Trump tweeted about. Because that's the thing.
Well, he was right about that.
That's the thing he's interested in.
Yeah,
I don't care about what's happening in this early stage of the Democratic primary, but obviously but he was watching enough to make fun of that. Like,
yeah. So when you were watching, when you were observing the candidates in the spin room, it seems like candidates in a spin room is when they're the least likely to say anything remotely interesting.
Of course,
because they're surrounded by like hordes of people. They're like.
You're not going to get a scoop as a journalist in a spin room, because anything they say to you, they're saying to at least 3 other people at the same time. Yeah,
like, it was supposedly scandalous that Tulsi spoke to Breitbart in the spin room.
But they just live streamed, they came up to her.
Yeah, they just walked up to her and asked her a question, and like she gave a very kind of anodyne response. It was not anything interesting at all. She was actually on Tucker last night, which was far more interesting.
Right. Well, I remember from the Wednesday, I was in the spin room on the Wednesday night as well, and the thing which struck me, the parallel actually was on the Wednesday night Tulsi and on the Thursday night Yang were the people who are surrounded by the most live streamers, as in rather than big professional camera crews, they would have a big crowd around them, but there's more people just like on iPhones with a little tripod, which is very on brand, I think, for her.
I'm actually mildly surprised that Bernie came out in the spin room.
But then the other thing,
somebody probably made him do it. In the
he was out and he basically made his way. He basically did like a bit of a red carpet walk where he made his way. He didn't really make his way through the crowd as much, but he basically stayed in the kind of cordoned off area. But he did speak to a lot of different press. The interesting one I thought to observe was Kamala Harris, who basically allowed herself to be ushered from, I think, Matthews and then onto CBS and then onto potentially ABC and then was out. She dusted the major networks.
So she didn't do any gaggles or anything.
Not that I saw. And there's a horde of journalists, 4 or 5 people deep, who are gathering behind, one of the TV cameras to basically like surreptitiously film what they're filming. And I just think by that point, that is redundant.
Well, in 2015, 2016, Trump would come out to the spin room and basically talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
He just kind of walked you around and would take questions from anybody who shouted them at him. He obviously did like the sit-down TV interviews as well in the spin room, but he talked to any like random blogger.
And that is why Marianne
I actually
Williamson is heir apparent for that reason.
Yeah. I actually asked, the one time that I ever interacted with Trump was in a spin room in New Hampshire in 2016 where I just shouted a question at him.
Yeah.
And he kind of like didn't want to answer my question, but like at least I had like some ability to communicate to him. But that's a way in which Biden's posture toward the media is not analogous with Trump. I mean, yeah, they're adversarial, but like Trump saturated media coverage in 2015, which is how he got a big, insurmountable polling lead, whereas Biden is doing the opposite approach. So, Biden's not going to be doing phoners with every news show, on CNN or whatever. So that's just kind of a fundamentally different style that they have in terms of how they're dealing with media coverage in principle.
Right. Revisiting Andrew Yang for a second, because you touched on him in your piece, and I wanted to bring this up as well. I think that while he may have been unwell, last night was an enormous missed opportunity for him. As in, going to the American people and saying, I want to give every adult $12,000 a year, should be the kind of thing which is setting tongues wagging. But on the night itself, he didn't get that big a reaction for it. He didn't chip in, and he didn't, attempt to reinforce that as his flagship policy. He got the chance to kind of briefly explain it, but then it was so blown over by everyone else talking about, healthcare in Central America and the migrants and everything else.
The thing to do would be to, if I were advising him, I would say, bring up the UBI pitch, do the standard pitch, but then try to contrast it maybe with another candidate, or even if you don't do that by name, try to bring up an angle where you're going to elicit some kind of response from other candidates. So you have a more extended segment on the UBI.
An ability to tie it into to what someone else is saying.
And you can kind of figure it into a broader range of issues. So
but if he's not saying 12 grand a year 3 times, outside of his closing statement in that debate, I think he's failed. And I believe he's qualified for the next one, and everyone more or less has basically got the chance to will be in Detroit in a month's time. That's what he should do. Well, that's what makes him different, and that's what makes him appealing, and that's why that's a big part of why he's cultivated this big online support. But the debate is about translating that into people who aren't just on the internet all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the way the people that were at the Yang Gang gathering thought about it was, they were saying that some people were claiming they were happy with it because they just wanted him to do a very basic introduction and not get too over his skis, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Because he's pretty much guaranteed to be in the subsequent debates. So he didn't have to overextend.
Right. He
just had to do a very minimal introductory remark, essentially.
Plant the seed.
Yeah. So, I guess that's plausible. But when I was sitting there, there were definitely a lot of boos among the Yang Gang because he was getting. There was a 45-minute.
When he mentioned Russia.
No, not when he mentioned. When he mentioned Russia, it was just silence.
Right.
He didn't get. I think people were just quizzical. Mm-hmm. Because they were not. A lot of people hadn't even heard him talk about that issue ever before.
I can't recall.
He did mention it on one of the Joe Rogan podcasts, or I guess on the one Joe Rogan podcast he mentioned it briefly, and he's probably mentioned it before, mentioned it in other venues, but it's definitely not something that he ever emphasizes, really.
Yeah.
So it came out of left field, and
you would have noticed.
I did, of course. Yeah. And he used the most incendiary phrasing too, where he said they're our biggest geopolitical foe. They hacked our democracy. It's just come on, Yang.
Yeah.
Is anybody in the Yang Gang really in the Yang Gang due to whatever your stance is on Russian interference? I don't think so. I mean, who are you actually appealing to?
But that was the interesting thing. So yesterday, I read that yesterday in the debate, the words Mueller and impeachment were not said at all in Thursday's debate. I'm not sure if the same occurred on Wednesday, but
in Wednesday there was an impeachment-specific question.
Right.
And I think the only two that addressed it were it was addressed to Beto.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember who else. One more, but no. On Thursday night there was nothing that related specifically to Russia, Mueller, impeachment, anything. Putin was brought up a couple times by Yang. I think Harris brought it up, and maybe one other that I'm forgetting. But there was no like specific question tailored to it, which is odd because Rachel Maddow's sitting on the stage.
Yeah.
It's just like, so MSNBC all day, every day, 24/7, nonstop covers Russia impeachment, Mueller, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Every little incremental development gets blown up into this kind of bombshell story.
Yeah.
And yet they have total editorial control over a 2-hour debate and don't bring it up once. What does that tell you about ultimately the significance of that story?
Well, on this topic, can we speak briefly about Eric Swalwell? Because obviously he was on the stage last night. He's been one of the standard bearers for this issue.
He's like my ironically favorite candidate.
Oh yeah. More than de Blasio now, actually, because de Blasio, like, I've always been kind of like loving the fact that de Blasio is running because I live in New York City and no one there likes him. But then he irritatingly did quite well.
Well, I mean, people
on
forget.
Wednesday night.
I don't know. I don't think you were in New York when he first won the mayoral race, but he was regarded as having a very slim to no chance of winning the Democratic primary in 2013.
Right.
And he kind of came from not out of nowhere, but he surprised a lot of people by surging at the last second and putting together a coalition.
Ahead of Wiener, though, right?
What?
It was ahead of Wiener, right?
Well, I mean, Wiener collapsed.
Yeah.
Wiener deflated, became flaccid.
Yeah.
And
good one.
and de Blasio, surged, but that was not far. It was far from a foregone conclusion that he would win that race. In fact, it was seen as exceedingly unlikely. So he actually demonstrated a fair amount of political skill when he won that race, which is very. I mean, it was an off-year election, so it got a lot of national attention.
Yeah. But fortunately, he has restored everyone's lack of faith.
Which is just
in
to
him
say that he has
with his screw up since.
Which is just to say that he has more.
Che Guevara in Miami, which
Right.
you do not do.
Maybe so, but the reason I brought up the mayoral race in 2013 is because he has more raw political skill than maybe people appreciate, who are just incessantly annoyed by him as mayor of New York and in his random entries into national politics.
But yeah, so Swalwell is who we were talking about. Swalwell he's running his campaign on gun violence as his big issue, but he didn't bring up impeachment, even though it's something which he's talked about very widely.
He brought up Russia as well. He said we have to break up with Russia or something.
Oh yeah, it was like a soundbite.
Yeah, like we have to break up with Russia.
Yeah. There was something
so he did bring it up.
But
he's such a dope.
His two moments were obviously the pass the torch thing, which we've discussed, but then also when Mayor Pete was talking about how he was, the institutional failure of the South Bend local government to deal with the relationship with the police, which led to this shooting, and enough. He then jumped in and was like, "You should fire the police chief." He was like, "You need to fire the police chief," and I just don't understand. Like, that's an odd. I get going after Mayor Pete or going after one of the top dogs is going to earn you attention, but like on that issue,
going after him for
strange.
Going after him for municipal personnel decisions.
Or go after him for doing all of these Silicon Valley fundraiser and taking money from big tech, if that is what you want to do.
Well, Eric Swalwell doesn't care about that, and he represents the East Bay in the Bay Area. So I mean, how is he going to do that?
Sure.
Which is ironic because Swalwell is so fundamentally uninteresting. I mean, he's uninteresting for how insufferable he is, but he actually succeeded a member of Congress who was genuinely interesting. His name was Pete Stark. Mm-hmm. Stark ended up getting primary when California adopted the jungle primary system.
Right.
Where you have often in California now you have two Democrats running against one another, and then
was it Feinstein against De Leon, right?
Right. And it was the same thing with Kamala Harris too. She ran against Linda Sanchez, I believe, so she actually dn't have a Republican opponent in 2016. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Pete Stark was his longtime incumbent, and had actually some radical views. He was sort of an interesting guy. He was lauded as the first member of Congress to ever come out and say he was an atheist. Mm-hmm. This was in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And then he gets thrown out by Swalwell, who's just this
He's our next president, so I guess it's a great trade-off.
Well, I mean, the one thing I tweeted yesterday, which I think is actually not a plausible scenario, but it's in a theoretical world, you kind of imagine this happening, where President Swalwell somehow ends up coming to power and institutes a national gun confiscation program, and basically, hastens the actual collapse of the American Republic.
Who knows?
Because that would do it.
Yeah, maybe. Well, you look at what's happening in Oregon at the moment, and
well, that wasn't a real thing.
What the Republicans being protected by the local militias?
Yeah.
That's not a real thing.
No, that was just a goof. That was just a goof. That was like ironic. That didn't actually happen. That was just like the Oregon Republican Twitter account, like trying to troll people.
Really?
I believe so. I mean, isn't that what happened? Or am I misremembering? Did
I mean the second time round where like they were refusing to go into vote and
but there was like a tweet
they were trying to be compelled to vote.
There was a tweet that everybody was flipping out about where there was a photo of like people standing at the Capitol or something.
That's not what I was thinking of.
Oh, right, whatever.
But,
Who
yeah.
cares?
Anyway, regardless, which candidates have we talked about? You know who got too much airtime? Michael Bennett. He late into the race. Obviously is a senator. Obviously has a different approach to healthcare than Bernie. Great, but he talked a disproportionate amount for how popular he is and how much he has to say, I thought.
Yeah, he doesn't have a whole lot that's novel to say, but I wouldn't discount him because he was, quote, late in the race. I mean, he ended up announcing his campaign in May, which is really not that late.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of...
In relative terms. And obviously he had health reasons, and we wish him well for that.
Well, yeah, but, and it's kind of... It's a common time. I mean, Bernie didn't announce his campaign in 2015, I think until April 30th.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, announcing in May, it seems late now, but it really shouldn't be. I mean, the process is too protracted in the first place, so we shouldn't begrudge people for, like, announcing over a year and a half before the election. I mean, it's kind of silly. And now, like, Joe Sestak is...
he's in.
Announced.
So I raised him because I think he was my pick for most boring. Tim Ryan would have been a close second, but then his interaction with Tulsi was so interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, Tim Ryan on paper, in a vacuum, the point he made about the party being disconnected from the industrial working class in the Midwest has some merit to it, but Tim Ryan doesn't really represent a genuine shift in that regard. I mean, he's kind of just a mainline Democrat who, like, at least rhetorically can recognize that disconnect, but he hasn't actually done anything to address it.
So I saw him in person in the hotel bar yesterday.
I think Klobuchar is the most boring.
Yeah, that's possible.
I can't think of anything interesting to say about her ever. She just doesn't like.
You watch out because there'll be a Filofax binder coming at you.
Yeah, I mean, she could be more interesting by like getting in touch with her real self and throwing around some office supplies.
Yeah.
She should sneak a stapler onto stage next time and just hurl it at somebody.
Right. I mean, so the thing is, she's the kind of candidate who I think that as like that story coming out early has coloured the approach that she would take. And I think had that not come out, she might have gone for the more aggressive Michael Bennett style, like I'm mad as hell approach to the debate. But I think that she maybe can't. That's not something which that maybe in her repertoire, but it's not something she feels she can deploy because people will be like, "Wow, she's being the crazy Filofax lady again." Like,
yeah, she's just being very smiley, and I mean, so we said that we should disagree on something. Is there anything that you disagreed in the piece today, or anything else previously, or do we just like?
I'm trying to think what I disagree with you about. I think that I kind of wanted to just big up Marianne Williamson again because I also spoke to her in person, and people were going crazy on Twitter because of her whole like Kate Bush vibe and the fact that she seems like she's a brand ambassador for Goop and all of this stuff. And that's correct, but like on television is one thing, in person it's something else. Like if you're stood in a gaggle of people around her and she looks at you, it's like she's kind of looking through you and into who you were in a past life. It's absolutely mystifying. I don't know.
That's kind of creepy, actually.
Yeah, but maybe that's because she's a celestial being from another dimension.
You sound like you're ready to join her spiritual movement.
If she pivoted her campaign into a cult, I would consider it.
Yeah, you wouldn't rule it out.
I wouldn't rule it out. What else are we going to disagree about?
I mean, if you have nothing, if you agree with me and I'm perfect, I mean, you can just say so.
Almost certainly not. Almost certainly not.
I mean, didn't you edit the piece that I did today?
I did edit.
And yet you can't recall anything you disagree with.
Well, no, I agree with most of your points about Harris and the echo chamber, as in that event played well in the room because it's a room full of activists, and it played well on Twitter because Twitter is also, effectively full of people who act like activists. But I think long-term, Biden's not going to be damaged by that.
I mean, Biden could be damaged with it in the limited sense of, like, donors getting slightly spooked, or certain members of, like, the consultant class who would have considered joining Biden in some way, maybe refraining now. So in terms of the invisible primary, as it's called, or like the party insiders,
Yeah.
I think it could have an effect on that. But in terms of which actually, makes a difference.
Sure.
But in terms of actually, in terms of your rank and file Democratic voters,
Yeah. Okay.
probably not.
What about?
I think I could imagine next week, Harris gets a spate of like new endorsements, at least from like House members or whatever, whereas Biden stalls on that front.
But I think it's interesting because I think a lot of the people who supposedly did well on the first night, now everyone has forgotten about. As in I believe Castro and Booker had slight spikes in the polls over the last 24 hours, but ultimately I think everyone's going to be talking about the Thursday night rather than the Wednesday because it was a lot more bloodthirsty. People went after Biden a lot more, whereas Warren was the biggest name in the pot on the Wednesday, and she actually performed fairly well. She maintained where she was. And
she didn't even have it, like they say Warren performed well. She didn't even have any exchanges. Did she have even like interface with any other candidates?
No, but I
think she just like gave her talking points.
You've got to rise above it. That's the Biden approach. You rise above it and run straight against Trump. That's what Marianne Williamson was trying to do in her closing statement.
But I hate how like you can say that Warren did well, quote unquote, when she didn't do she didn't debate anything. She just spoke. But standing on a podium with other people. Yeah, but that's why
she stood on the podium with other people and said what she thought and didn't get challenged for it. Right. And that's a great way to win a debate.
Like I say Tulsi did well in the sense that she had a really good extemporaneous exchange.
Yeah.
With another candidate. People are saying that Kamala did well, arguably because she had an exchange with Biden that, took him down a peg or whatever. I don't think you should get credit from a stylistic standpoint just because you managed to stand there and say what you say in every stump speech. So it just but that's just kind of like.
However, Beto,
an axiom of punditry.
Beto, however, did have a bad night.
I guess. Did he? I mean, I don't know. He had a big cheering section. Like the cheering section was right in front of me in the hall. I don't know. I guess. I just think, people made fun of his Spanish. People made fun of his Spanish thing, but the reason why he's still considered in the top tier, I don't know if he really is, but like at least in the top 7 candidates or whatever.
He's got like 5 or 6%, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it's actually around like 3 or 4 now. But I mean, the reason why he's still somewhat in contention is because he actually has a disproportionate share of Latino Hispanic support.
Yeah.
So I mean, people made fun of him talking in Spanish. I'm not fluent in Spanish, so I couldn't tell if it was actually well done. But I don't know why that got such mockery. I mean, I think it actually made sense for him strategically to do that.
Well, it's because a lot of people, if they're like me, the minute he started doing that, had Alex Jones's voice playing in their head. Where, there's the clip of him in Texas where he just calls him Robert Francis O'Rourke, right? and it just is reinforcing how Irish he really is. Like,
well, I mean, he does speak Spanish. Supposedly, Julian Castro is not even fluent in Spanish.
Really?
That's what somebody told me. I mean, maybe I should fact check that.
You should fact check that.
But I mean, I think he's.
But that, again, like the reason that people say Castro did well is because he monstered Beto on an issue which they should both be good on because they're Texans. So in some respects, it's kind of just like watching 2 stags fight, and all the other deer just stand around and like watch for a minute while they have it out. And that's what happened between Castro and O'Rourke. That's what happened between Biden and Harris. But ultimately, like it probably is broadly insignificant in terms of how this election is going to go. It's going to be interpreted.
The thing that bugs me about how pundits analyze debates is that they determine who wins, quote unquote, on the basis of like who had the best theatrical performance, rather than who said substantively what is most virtuous.
Right.
So
how is that different to what we've just been doing for the last time?
I mean, I guess we kind of have done it. But I mean, I try to at least incorporate some normative assessments.
Yeah.
In terms of like who actually did well on the merits.
Yeah.
In terms of what they were saying.
Awesome. I'm trying to think. We've discussed. Oh yeah, Kirsten Gillibrand's the only candidate who got on the stage yesterday.
Who cares?
Right. The thing is, like, she came across well, but I just don't think that she's really running.
I just like that Bernie talked over her and demonstrated his virulent sexism.
Yeah, of course.
He should fundraise on that moment.
Yeah, there were just those little.
He proved how much he doesn't value women.
So I spoke to John Delaney yesterday as well, because he was one of the Wednesday night candidates who was still lingering around. And I asked him how he would change the format of the debate to give candidates like him more of a chance to pitch the nation. And he suggested opening statements and jumping off points on the same issue. So basically, you give everyone, let's say the questions about climate change, rather than doing like a show of hands, you give everyone 45 seconds on it, and then the discussion would go on from there.
The whole concept of a show of hands question is like unbelievably inane. It's like a third grade classroom.
Yeah.
Really, you're going to ask like about you're going to reduce a question about how you'd reform the American healthcare system to a show of hands?
Yeah. I don't know. I think I lament the fact that there isn't a Fox News debate, because I think that would be one of the more interesting ones.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
Because you'd see the candidates who go on Fox News more, and a lot of them have started to do it more. Obviously, you mentioned Tulsi did it on Friday, but Swalwell has been on Fox News recently.
Bernie had a town hall on Fox News.
Exactly.
So did
Pete. Gillibrand. So did all these people. I think that, and also you would assume that they might fill the room slightly differently to how NBC decided to, and all of the people who were in the room itself. I think that the way that they could do it would make for more interesting viewing and might be more indicative of what might actually happen in an election.
Yeah.
But it's not happening, so forget it, right?
But more fundamentally, it's just absurd that commercial network TV has exclusive domain over how presidential debates are structured and what the editorial content is. Like, there's no necessary reason for why that should be the case, and I mentioned this in the piece too.
Yeah.
It's a conscious choice made by the party insiders and their buddies who run the networks. And it's mutually advantageous for both of them.
So we should get it. We should get the next one on your Patreon then.
Well, yeah, I mean they should. I would, but like.
Well, they do a Rogan moderated debate.
I mean, Jay Inslee has actually said that they should have a climate change debate, and they've turned it down. I mean, I don't think that would be that interesting, frankly. But if you want to do it, fine. I mean, I know a lot of people are interested in that issue. Yeah. And I actually because he was like milling around. We actually haven't mentioned him, but he was milling around at the debate on Wednesday. And I asked him something like, "Do you find it odd that the TV networks have such a monopoly on what these debates consist of?" And he said, "Well, blah blah blah. We should have a climate change debate." Well, I mean, are you going to? How are you going to do that if the DNC won't sanction it? Well, he said, "Oh, we got to tell the DNC to do it." So you have to like plead your case to the DNC. Rather than setting up stuff on your own. Remember the Ronald Reagan's famous moment, "I paid for this microphone"? Yeah. That was because he and the other campaigns on their own set up a debate in New Hampshire. They didn't have the Republican National Committee orchestrating that. And there ought not to be any necessary reason why that couldn't also happen today. Everybody and their mother live streams now. You can have it on YouTube. You could have it on some other TV network that's not so officious in terms of like micromanaging everything. So I mean, it should theoretically be possible.
Choose your own adventure game on Netflix, where
pick something. I mean, but whatever. All right, I'm going to the airport shortly.
Wonderful. You didn't introduce me, by the way, so I'm sure no one knows who I am.
Did I? Oh, no. I said you were a British invader.
Yeah, but that's we can keep. We can keep me anonymous.
Well, I mean, the only reason I have you on is just as a foil, so I could like just.
Yeah.
Go through my reactions.
It's never about the guests.
No. All right. Well, just state who you are then, for the record.
I've been Matt McDonald, the managing editor of the Spectator USA.
Yes, that's right. And I am a frequent contributor to the Spectator USA. I post my links on YouTube and elsewhere, so people should be aware of that. And that's it. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.